and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, China publishes a white paper questioning the legality of the South China Sea arbitration case ruling. What is the truth lying beneath the waters? And South Korea's newest U.S. missile defense system sparks political anger in Pyongyang, Beijing, and also in Russia. Could defense become offensive? We begin today's show with the South China Sea issue just a day after an international arbitration tribunal in The Hague ruled in favor of the Philippines over its South China Sea dispute with China. China's Information Office of the State Council has released a white paper declaring the country's position. It shows some historical facts to illustrate China's sovereignty over the South China Sea and adheres to its position of negotiations to solve the dispute.
Reiterating China's position. To further prove its stance over the South China Sea issue, the Chinese government has issued a white paper of more than 20,000 Chinese characters in length, strongly expressing its sovereignty and rights. The historical facts show that China was the first not only to discover, name and explore the South China Sea islands, but also to exercise sovereignty and jurisdiction over them. But since the 1970s, the Philippines has been invading the islands and reefs by force and started to build military facilities. The two countries both agreed to settle their disputes through bilateral negotiation. But in 2013, the Philippines filed the arbitration case, ignoring the agreement previously agreed on by the two countries. China has rejected the tribunal's ruling and still seeks to settle the dispute through negotiation. After the ruling was announced, the South China Sea arbitration remained the top trending topics in China.
I feel the same as all the Chinese. I took the arbitration as nothing more than a piece of paper or nonsense.
When we are hurt by other countries, we should defend ourselves. We should protect our sovereignty.
On Wednesday, the Chinese government announced further Chinese military deployment in the South China Sea.
As to whether China will set up an air defense identification zone, let me first say that China has the right to do so. This is not a system invented by China, but by some other major countries. We have set up an ADIZ in the East China Sea, and whether we will set up another one in the South China Sea will depend on the degree of threat we are facing.
Liu also said he was doubtful of the tribunal itself. Out of all 5 arbitrators at the tribunal, 1 was appointed by the Philippines and the rest all appointed by a Japanese judge. None of them originated from Asia. As the issue keeps simmering, some have questioned that the territorial disputes have been used for political manipulation.
And for more of the discussion, we are having Mr. Zhu Feng, who is the Executive Director of the China Center for Collaborative Studies of the South China Sea at Nanjing University. And also with us here, Senior Captain Zhang Junshou from the China Naval Research Institute. Welcome to both of you. First of all, it seems there have been enormous amount of legal experts suggesting their surprise of the outcome and the ruling of the arbitration, suggesting it is so much sweepingly in favor of the Philippines, very unusual in any international arbitration ruling. Professor Zhu, now when you think about it, what about the legalities and the jurisdictions, once again, of this arbitration?
My assumption is this. This tribunal has no jurisdiction at all. We can also just come to this conclusion from the different angles. First, we see it's a relatively tentative setting under the UNCLOS. But the problem is, it does not just have a very good representation in terms of its composition. The second, I think this tribunal also very remarkably abused the. So it's not just a crossing line. They also become some sort of a radicalizing some sort of a job. Then last one is, I think, what they sort of their job. They're a god. They're truly just a savior. to some sort of a very thorny and challenging questions in Asia, most of them European. Yes, they're well-established, legalists, but the problem is, given their quite thinner, the expertise on Asian affairs, how can they take themselves as a savior of some sort of such a long, lingering, daunting South China Sea territorial disputes? Putting all things together, I have to say, just this tribunal has no jurisdiction at all.
Senior Captain Zhang, you're a military man. From your perspective, how do you see this arbitration ruling?
Well, I don't think the arbitral tribunal has the jurisdiction over this case, and also it actively deprives China of its right to choose on its own the dispute settlement regime. So, and this will provoke tensions in this region. And we know that already the United States is sending its warships and airplanes to this area and to intimidate China into submission. So after this, we don't know what the United States will do. So this is maybe the point which we are not sure of.
Well, both of you are challenging the legalities and also the evidence this arbitration has toward its ruling. There are also others who are trying to find out the nature of it. On Wednesday, for example, the United Nations declared through its social media site that it had nothing to do with the tribunal, which was established in the year 1899. Meanwhile, at a press conference after the white paper's release from China, the Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenmin expressed further doubt.
The miserable thing is the tribunal took the advice of one witness without any investigation. Who is supporting them? They offer paid service. Who is paying them? The Philippines or even other countries. The system is completely different from that of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea.
Is it paid service, or this is an arbitration that should be really legally respected? Professor Zhu.
Of course, there's a lot of doubt for how those arbiters personally benefit from this case. But unfortunately, so far, I have no evidence at all. There's a very competing arguments. Someone says they are officially paid by some sort of UN organizations. And someone say they will take charge of from some sort of such a legal service as an arbiter to, dispute the parties. All of such truths should be further, clarified before we can come to a very, very sound, adequate conclusion. But the problem is, I'm also very suspected of a real motive behind some sort of such extremely biased and just the Philippine tilting, and just you say the overwhelmingly unfavorable to China's award just come over. So what kind of the things just got those arbiters, we say, goes that farther to cost there some sort of a repercussion and a reputation and taking very one-sided the conclusion.
Right.
So I'm very doubtful of that.
Senior Captain Zhang, there are a lot of questions by legal experts since the award was issued about the ramification of this specific issue and the ruling, what it would mean for other territorial disputes around the world, what it would mean for the credibility of international arbitration, whether it is this specific organization or other ones related much more closely to the UN. What do you make of it?
Well, I think first, the arbitration or the award of this arbitration will certainly damage the authority of such kind of tribunals in the future, because they have set a very bad example to ignore the legal rights of China, and they have taken a biased position toward China. They ignore the China's position that we will not take part in such tribunal and also the arbitration. We have made announcement before. Yes.
But Senior Captain Zhang, when you and Professor Zhu are suggesting it is unfair, it is not according to the truth. So what exactly is the truth from the Chinese side? Senior Captain Zhang, what evidence, if you can very briefly to suggest to our international audience through our program, does China have in hand that could firmly confirm China's position that there is as territorial disputes even in this area because China has been exercising sovereignty over the area in history? What kind of firm have in your hand when you are making all of these statements?
Well, I think we have sufficient evidence that can prove that China has...
Give some examples.
This evidence includes books, documents, and also some books, maps in the old times, including those maps and books from the United States, Japan, and European countries, which explicitly mark that these islands, some of the islands, especially in the Spratly Island, in the Nansha Islands, belong to China. And also China has conducted naval patrol in the ancient time from the Song Dynasty. That's about 907. And China took the first naval patrol on the South China Sea.
Will Professor Zhu, historical records necessarily going to prove China's position?
Of course, I think the most convincing evidence is, we say, such a two historical documents laid out for international community to rebuild post the Second World War order. So one is we also know it's we say Kailo Declaration. Another one is we say Potsdam Declaration.
Those are two big documents for people to look into. How is it related to the topic that we are having today?
Of course, because you know both the Paracel Island was a Shisha Qundao and the Spratly Island was a Nansha Qundao was just occupied and conquered by the imperialist Japanese troops. So after the
During
Japan's
the Second
defeat,
World War.
yes. So then these two historical documents very clearly just declare all some sort of such territories annexed, and even just some sort of illegally just taken over by the imperialist Japan's troops should just return to Asian 15 state. So then, along with the Taiwan and the Jinmen Maju, then we will see such two islands also just legally returned to China. Then back to in 1946, I think the KMT government dispatched the freeze, and not just reclaim these two islands, but also setting some sort of very important monumental stone, you know, the plaques in these islands, and it just very, very officially declare back to 1946. So China now just has a legally claim back what belong to China from such two islands.
All right.
It's a very conceivable and also very, very perceivable.
Of course, at this moment, we do not have 100 hours to go through all of these historical records, but I'm sure those of our audience members who are interested in history and want to find out the truth, they might want to look into many of these documents you just mentioned. Having said that, though, what is important now is not only about the award, because China already dismissed the award, suggesting not accept and not going to so-called adhere to it. So what is going to happen now? How all sides going to react to this? Not only today, not only tomorrow, but also in the short term, in a few months, for example? Professor Zhu, what do you think?
Okay, a good question. So how the different players could just respond, supposedly?
Let me narrow it down, since you are
Okay.
coming from the Chinese side. So why don't I just ask you, how do you think the Chinese side would react to this?
Okay, first of all, then we will see the Chinese government come up with the three documents, two statements and one white paper.
All right.
They're all part of the package of the Chinese response. It's very, very evident then Beijing not just make clear our position, but also specify China's claim in South China Sea. That kind of very resounding documents really is very telling the world.
Besides arguments, what about the military possibilities? That's probably the biggest question mark in many's mind. Senior Captain Zhang, Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenmin, when he was conference earlier in the day, he was talking about one thing, and I want to quote, China has the right to establish ADIZ, end of quote. As we remember, back in the year 2013, when it was established in East China Sea, how much controversy it involved. So will China do that? Has the right does not necessarily equals to will, but will China do that?
Yes, you are right. First, we have the right to establish another ADIZ in the South China Sea. It's the right of a sovereign state. And also there have been precedents like this. The United States, Japan, Korea, and other countries have already established their ADIZs. The China is just following the example. Concerning the South China Sea, I don't think up to now we have made our decision to set up another ADIZ. We will do this according to the threat we are facing.
Okay, we have noticed from the Philippine side, there has been quite muted reactions. The foreign minister was talking about calm and restraint yesterday, but also you haven't heard much from the president yet. So what do you make of the current reaction? Is that going to be considered as positive from the Chinese side?
Of course it is, because it's a very interesting, sharp contrast and very remarkable difference from the President Duterte's previous administration. So I think the administration, Aquino III administration usually is very emotional, hostile, and even our words is just trying to just back up the United States and then pushing China harder and just overtaking some sort of such a maritime features in South China Sea, which originally belonged to China.
Right. Now, Professor Zhu, you have been a geopolitical expert of the region for a long time, so let me ask you this. Can the Duterte administration be able to act on its will, or the will of the country, free from, let's just say, pressures from the others, even from the United States, if I could be specific?
Good question, but it's still harder to predict how big the policy change scope will be. The Duterte government just adopting. But my hunch is this: Duterte administration truly presents some sort of their very remarkably different, the traits, different policy preference, and the policy priority as well. So then we can put the hope on some sort of very friendly action and reaction cycle. If we can show some of the Chinese goodwill, then probably we can help in trade-off some sort of the Philippines good return.
If negotiation is still possible, as the Chinese side suggested today while releasing the white paper, Senior Captain Zhang, what is going to be the role of the Chinese military?
Well, I think China is maybe is hoping, or we are hoping that we are looking forward to the resumption of talks and negotiations with the Philippines, but not based on the arbitration. We should return to the status before the arbitration, that 2013. But in the future, I think the Chinese military will take part in the cooperation with ASEAN countries, including the Philippines. We can conduct some sort of cooperation on maritime issues, or for the maritime search and rescue, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and also the anti-piracy operations in this area. So the Chinese military can take part all of these kind of cooperations with ASEAN countries, including the Philippines.
And finally, before we go, Professor Zhu, is this desire for peace that we have witnessed both in the Philippines and in China a product of the arbitration, or it has been the original thought from the two countries anyway? Secondly, is peace possible? Can China give peace a chance by what?
Of course, the peace now is just there in South China Sea. I don't think the things now is getting out of control. So whatever the tension is, I see quite a little intention and some sort of, strong plots on either side to reverse the status quo. But the problem is, what kind of the things we should give the hope to? We should give the chance to diplomacy. Let's elevate the diplomacy. Let's just proceed well with the diplomacy. So then the key challenge for now is under what conditions the diplomacy could reactivate it.
One sentence from you, under what condition from the Chinese side?
No condition at all. Maybe. But on the other hand, of course, let's pushing aside this very awful tribunal awards. That would be a very good starting point.
Very interesting input coming from both of you. Thank you so much, Senior Captain Zhang Junshe and Professor Zhu Feng. Thank you for being with us. And Professor Zhu, you probably want to stay with us for another round of discussion because with another crisis going on in this part of the world. Thank you so much for both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. A new missile defense system jointly set up by Washington and Seoul against the DPRK raises both questions and tensions in the region. Is South Korea going too far, some ask. You're watching World Insight coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. Now let's turn to Korean Peninsula. South Korea has just announced it will deploy a U.S.-supplied anti-missile system known as THAAD in its southeastern county of Seong. Defense Ministry says the location of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System will provide protection for up to 2/3 of the South Korean population and for nuclear power plants and oil storage facilities. The system is claimed to counter the threat from Pyongyang. Though Beijing and Moscow have repeatedly expressed their concerns about this military decision, Washington and Seoul announced deployment plans last week among opposition from neighboring countries.
Stirring up the Korean Peninsula. U.S. and South Korean military officials have agreed to deploy an advanced U.S. missile defense system called the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, in South Korea to cope with what they call the DPRK threats. The selected location for the system was revealed today.
사드 체계의 군사적 효용성을 극대화하고
We propose the southeastern county of Seongju as the optimum location for deployment of the THAAD system to maximize the military effectiveness while minimizing any impact on the safety of local residents and the environment.
Facing strong objections from neighboring countries, South Korea's president defended this military decision.
이미 수차례 밝혔듯이
As it was clarified multiple times, THAAD will neither target any country other than the DPRK, nor encroach on security interests of a third-party country. We have no reason to do so. We're taking a purely defensive measure to protect our nation and people.
This move angered North Korea, who threatened to make a physical response to the deployment of the missile defense system. Beijing and Moscow have also opposed the THAAD system. Both governments have repeatedly voiced serious concerns over the deployment, as it far exceeds the Korean Peninsula's defense needs. THAAD is designed to destroy missiles at a high altitude of 40 to 150 kilometers. But most missiles launched by the DPRK fly at a much lower altitude of less than 20 kilometers.
We have a good reason and a fair right to question the motives behind the move. We demand the United States should not seek its own security at the expense of others, let alone harm the legitimate security concerns and interests of other countries, under the excuse of security threat.
Pyongyang's nuclear test and long-range rocket launched earlier this year have intensified tensions on Korean Peninsula. Rather than resolving these tensions, bringing in the THAAD system might just be adding fuel to fire.
For more discussion on the THAAD missile deployment in South Korea, we are joined once again here in the Beijing studio, Professor Zhu Feng, Executive Director of the China Center for Collaborative Studies of the South China Sea at Nanjing University. Of course, he has been for decades a scholar on the Korean Peninsula issue. Welcome back to our program. Meanwhile, in Seoul, we are having Mr. Chen Ming-Lee, who is a professor of international relations at Yonsei University. And in Washington, D.C., we are joined by Mr. Alexander Masarov, adjunct professor at both Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and at Georgetown University. Welcome to the three of you gentlemen. We are at a very critical stage at this moment. Professor Chen Ming-Lee, we understand there are some new information suggesting the DPRK is looking at the test of another round of a nuclear test. Is that what you've also been observing?
Well, we don't really know exactly what the DPRK will do. We do know exactly by their actions. In January, they tested the fourth nuclear weapon. They've tested an intermediate range ballistic missile. They're also claiming to have tested submarine-launched ballistic missiles. So I think it's very important for our Chinese and Russian friends to understand. South Korea's decision to deploy the THAAD with the U.S. was a purely defensive decision. And this is against a growing North Korean nuclear threat, which is not abating. So this is one of the most critical issues, not only in Korea, but in Northeast Asia.
Do the Chinese friend understand, Professor Zhu?
Partly I agree, but partly I disagree, because I see the decision was a consequence of a change the ground strategy of the South Korean, because we know such a THAAD, centered some sort of a dispute between two sides could be tracing back to in 1999. Then after Kim Dae-jung, Lee Moo-hin, and the Lee Min-ba government, then we say the Park Geun-hye government made the decision at the end. But what kind of the difference just existing? Why the previous governments, after the three sequential ones, they reject, but this government come down to the decision. So I think I see a big change is not how looming the North Korea's threat will be. Then actually it's some sort of a very remarkable shift of the ground security strategic thinking.
There has also been a strategic thinking shift in Washington. Professor Masarov, there were earlier the six-party talks and then became the so-called strategic patience coming from the Obama administration. After a few years, it seems that it hadn't worked, only making things going to the other side. So what do you make of what Professor Zhu just mentioned? Has the actions shifted?
I agree.
Have the actions shifted, or actually have the strategies and strategic thinkings shifted to begin with?
I don't think that strategic thinking shifted, but I agree with you that the current administration is becoming much more assertive in defending its interests on the Korean Peninsula following the fourth North Korean nuclear test and subsequent missile tests. And THAAD decision is basically it's a legitimate decision aimed at upgrading the U.S. ROC defense against the growing North Korean missile and nuclear threat. Let me say that I think both short-term and kind of longer-term factors at work here. On the tactical side, we obviously were surprised by the successful Musudan test conducted on June 22nd. Musudan is a road mobile intermediate range ballistic missile, so everybody was caught by surprise because it clearly is a demonstration of augmented capabilities. Also, the North Koreans conducted, the very successful Party Congress, then the SPA session, put in place a new governance system, if you wish. And so the impression was, the point is Kim Jong-un was on a roll, and that must have, and as a result, the United States made a very difficult decision to designate Kim Jong-un as a target for the sanctions of the U.S. Treasury, which in the North Korean parlance crossed the North Korean red line. The South Koreans basically decided to do the same thing and accepted the THAAD deployment. I see these two decisions as going together. It's an alliance decision.
All right. I would prefer everybody have a fair share of time when you answer the question so that everybody could have the fair share of say in the discussion. So let me come back to you, Professor Lee from South Korea. The question is not necessarily that the 6 parties have any issue with one another about the end goal, which is to make sure about peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, but rather the way to do it. And the thing is, when South Korea and the US thinking about the THAAD missile system, the other parties of the 6-party talks are not necessarily feeling safe. Will that help with all parties' unity to try to solve the problem? Or will that, in a way, bring a collapse of the collaboration, which should be crucial in changing or maintaining the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula? Professor Lee, I think that is a very eligible question.
Yes, it's a very fair question. I agree that this is a very sensitive issue to all the parties concerned, including our American and Japanese friends, and of course China and Russia, the other members of the 6-party talks. But we have to remember 3 critical points. Number 1, the 6-party talks are all other peaceful efforts if the atmosphere is right, but North Korea keeps on provocating South Korea's defenses for the last several years. Number 2, the critical issue here is we have to understand that this threat is growing. It is not stopping as we speak. And the North Korea does not only have chemical biological weapons, they have other whole list of WMD. And this is only a purely defensive measure, as I've said. And number 3, we have to make sure that over the longer term, all of the other parties must agree there must be security and stability. But the key issue is this: as a sovereign state, South Korea has the right to take appropriate defensive actions, just like China does or Russia does.
Okay.
So sovereignty and security must go hand in hand.
All right. Those points are being made. We are also being hearing from various sides the reactions, including from the media. There are certain medias coming from China, Global Times, which is quite known for its opinions coming from some parts of the Chinese society, published an article recently suggesting the THAAD deployment may haunt not only DPRK, but also a wider region in Northeast Asia in the long term. The China Daily, meanwhile, newspaper said that this move will break the strategic balance and escalate the trust deficit among powers. In addition, Asian News Network went further to say that the deployment has the potential to spark fear of a new Cold War. Of course, media could have their own perspective. The question is, Professor Zhu, let me come back to you. Will a THAAD system solve the problem? And why China, while the South Korean professor said it very clearly, it's going to protect us. Why is China feeling threatened when their South Korean counterpart is being protected?
Yes, I assume I think my friend mainly made a great point. So sovereignty and security should go hand in hand. But the problem is we're our neighbor. So while you just going on with U.S. security endorsement, then it also will be affect the Chinese thinking and the Chinese some sort of overreacting. So then I see the THAAD deployment decision Chile complicated regional, we say, geopolitical landscape. But the problem is Chinese newspaper also exaggerate some sort of that kind of a very grim, the prospect. I don't think the THAAD decision also will trigger some sort of any kind of the prospect of the new Cold War. That's too much.
All right. There are 2 questions I really want to ask you. It's very important how the Chinese are thinking in this process, because I think South Koreans are the Chinese are the direct parties that are likely to be implemented, to be impacted rather, in the region. So let me ask you first question. That is, why would the Chinese still be concerned? Because the South Koreans have already assured China to a certain extent that the anti-missile system is going to have a range 500, but not further than that. If it changes, China will notice it. So why China is still concerned?
Of course, I think China's concern is very multiple. First of all, in the technical terms, so how the THAAD system also will be we say neutralizing the Chinese nuclear stability or nuclear deterrence. The second is, of course, the THAAD decision also will signaling some sort of closer alarms-based coordination between U.S. and South Korea. Of course, where we see that kind of things is undermining the China-U.S. Koreans coordination vis-a-vis denuclearization in North Korea. So all we can just speaking very simply, we see such a real consequences is really complicating some sort of, we say, contending security calculus.
Professor Lee, have to come back to you. Will that, in a way, concerns from the Chinese side or Russian side or others, destroy or hurt the trust that is crucially needed, first of all? And secondly, why? And would that really help a THAAD anti-missile system overall to prevent the North of going further? Or it is only going to be a reaction that the South Koreans could have toward the North? Professor Lee.
You know, defense and offense oftentimes depends on the eye of the beholder.
Right, that's right.
And I agree with my good friend Zhu Feng and, of course, Alex in Washington, that the operative word here is to maintain stability on the Korean Peninsula. And we are agreed on that particular point. But the Korean-Chinese relationship is much deeper and much more important than this particular issue. And so as important as the DPRK threat is, as important as having our own defenses with the THAAD system, for example, I believe this is not going to dominate overall Chinese-South Korean relations. As you know, every single year we trade over $350 billion. China is our biggest trade partner and a very important political partner. So on this particular note, I believe that President Park Geun-hye and President Xi Jinping, once they meet at the G20 summit in Shanghai very soon, they will be able to discuss a range of issues that will move this relationship forward.
Mr. Mansurov, we also want you to come in here for your share of the say. Of course, there has been shifts of strategies and actions coming from U.S. side. But of course, you are also having a political season. Nobody knows what's going to be the future strategy coming from the U.S. toward the Korean Peninsula issue. That's one of the biggest uncertainties we're facing now among the 6 parties. So what do you make of that potential? What is likely to be the rhetorics, you think, in the near future coming from Washington? What would that mean, whether for THAAD or concerning peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula? Professor Mansurov.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I can say that probably if Hillary Clinton is elected, then we'll see the continuation of the current policy, maybe a little bit more on the hardline side than today. If Donald Trump is elected, then it will be a different world. Everybody will be affected, including you know, the Korean Peninsula, China, you know, Japan, our alliances. So it will be a very different policy.
All right, thank you. Well, we have to let you respond to that, Professor Zhu, what both Professor Lee and Professor Mansurov just said. So many uncertainties. And we also have uncertainties here in China because there are debates going on in this country. And there are suggestions coming from the hawks that we should have sanctions even against South Korea because of the deployment of the THAAD system or the potential of it. So what do you make of all of these uncertainties, particularly here in China?
Okay, so first of all, I'm strongly opposed to any sanction initiative vis-a-vis South Korea because I consider such any retaliation just based on the THAAD decision, getting things worse. On the other hand, we should also just have exploiting some sort of diplomatic space, as Professor Lee just mentioned. So we will have just a summit meeting soon. We can just very honestly and very realistically exchange the views at the summit level. On the other hand, we will see China and South Korean relations, of course, is a very comprehensive one. It's not just the THAAD issues only. So we have a lot of mutually benefiting relationships. So then, for the moment, yes, Chinese could speak on a very dire terms against the South Koreans such a decision, but on the other hand, we should still calm down.
Very important. Before we go, we only have 30 seconds left, and therefore each of you maybe have a fair share. What's next? What's going to be the problem solver? Even though we don't know, but we still need to think about this. It's very important to think about this and discuss this. Professor Lee.
Yes, we have one very, very important issue here, and that is every source of this threat is Kim Jong-un and North Korea. We have very responsible leaders in China, in South Korea, and in the U.S. And it's my sincere hope that the three countries, in particular China, the U.S., and South Korea, can cooperate to overcome this very difficult issue.
All right, Professor Mansurov.
Of course, we will expect more missile tests, possibly another nuclear test from North Korea, more belligerent rhetoric from the DPRK, and it's very important that everybody, the Republic of Korea, United States, and China work together to deal with this crisis situation.
Final words from you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the North Korea issue now is a very big one. So then all parties, including Russia, China, US, and the Koreans should just lining up against any new intimidating moves probably adopted by DPRK.
And also one another, have better trust. I guess that wouldn't hurt.
Yes.
Professor Chen Ming Lee and Professor Alexander Mansurov. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.